Hi, I'm Harlow, and this is the story of how a simple girl's trip revealed something far deeper about erasure, kindness, and the quiet courage it takes to speak up when everyone else would rather you stay silent. They left me in the mountains with no phone, no bag, and no explanation, then edited me out of the memory like I'd never been there at all. But what stayed with me wasn't the silence they gave me. It was the kindness of strangers, and the moment I finally chose to rewrite my own story. Before we go any further, tell me, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? If yes, comment number 1. If no, comment number 0. This is a family drama you don't want to miss. They said it was a girl's trip to reconnect, reset, and heal. But I should have known. Some invitations come wrapped in expectations, not love. The kitchen window shivered with the sound of early September rain. I stood barefoot on the tile floor, holding a chipped mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm. Outside, the gray sky stretched like a wool blanket, low and heavy over Portland. My suitcase sat half-packed by the door, as indecisive as I felt. On the table, my phone buzzed again, with the same message I'd read 5 times already. Let's try again. Just us girls. Rowan. It was Rowan's voice I could hear as I read it. Effortlessly charming, like nothing ever hurt too deeply or stayed too long. Like things just floated off her. She could throw out an olive branch wrapped in a glitter bow, and somehow you'd forget that she once used it to hit you over the head. I wanted to believe her. That was the trouble. Mom once said, "You're the strong one, Harlow. That's why you're easy to leave behind." She'd meant it like praise. I knew that. But praise has a funny way of sounding like permission when it comes to being forgotten. I carried my coffee to the couch and sat down beside the suitcase. The journal I hadn't touched in months was tucked under a folded sweatshirt. Its leather cover was worn smooth, the spine soft from too many false starts. Still, I slipped it into the suitcase again. Just in case I found words out there worth keeping. My work phone rang a little after 10. Luis Romero, the closest thing I had to a boss, and the only person who knew how much I was holding back. I'd told him the week before that I might need some space. His response was simple. Take it. Sometimes you go to the mountain to see who still follows. He always did have a way of making things sound like wisdom passed down from a better world. I looked out the window while we spoke. The leaves hadn't turned yet, but the air carried that faint coppery edge that says summer is done pretending. Luis didn't press for details, just told me he'd cover my caseload until I was ready. I promised I wouldn't be gone too long. I didn't promise how I'd come back. The call with Mom came after lunch. She asked what I was doing, though she already knew. "I think I'm going," I said. "To Colorado?" I hesitated. "To Chimney Rock." She sighed too softly. "You should go. It'll be good, if you don't stir anything up." It wasn't a warning. It was a request to be the version of me that didn't make things complicated. The version who smiled at backhanded compliments and offered to do the dishes while everyone else took family photos without me. I told her I'd think about it. Then I hung up and opened my laptop. The airline website loaded slowly, as if giving me time to change my mind. I picked a window seat on a midday flight, booked it, closed the tab. Then I just sat there for a minute, staring at my own reflection in the dark screen. Hope is a strange ache. You can't ice it, and you can't quite locate it. It just lingers, like steam on glass, fogging the edges, but never staying long enough to see clearly through. I reached for my old camera on the shelf. I hadn't used it in months, but it still held a familiar weight. I wrapped the strap around my hand and packed it without thinking. Maybe I just needed to see things differently this time, Or maybe I needed proof that I was ever there at all. When the final zip closed over the suitcase, it made a sound that felt louder than it should have, like I'd sealed something I couldn't unpack until later. My phone lit up again. Yay! And don't worry, I've got everything planned. Just bring yourself. The air in Chimney Rock was thinner than I expected, or maybe it was just harder to breathe around them. When I stepped out of the SUV, dust curled around my sneakers like smoke. The wind up here wasn't harsh, but it carried a dryness that made me feel like I'd left something behind, even if I hadn't. The hostel stood at the edge of the hill, adobe-colored with narrow windows, and a porch strung in lights that flickered against the early evening glow. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like stepping into a story I wasn't meant to be part of. Rowan had hugged me at the airport with a force that felt more like choreography than care. "Let's not ruin this, okay?" she'd whispered, her chin brushing my shoulder. Her perfume lingered longer than her sentiment. Now she was in full hostess mode, deciding where the bags went, who got what bed, what time dinner was. The others followed her easily. Delia, Zoe, and Taylor were all sharp hair, sharper voices. I tried to match their rhythm, nodding when they laughed, smiling when they clinked their sparkling waters on the porch. The group had already hiked earlier, posting curated selfies with the red rocks in the background. Rowan had leaned close to me on the trail, asking if I'd brought the big camera. I had, but by the time I caught up from adjusting the lens, they'd moved on to the next view without me. That night at dinner, the conversation spun fast. Zoe talked about a yoga retreat in Sedona. Taylor mentioned some brand deal she'd signed for her baking channel. When the server dropped off our burgers and sweet potato fries, I offered a quiet story about a senior woman I'd helped last month through a housing appeal. Her landlord had tried to evict her during a medical treatment cycle. Delia snorted. "You still doing charity work? That's cute." I blinked, then smiled. Default reaction. It was safer than the truth. Rowan waved her hand like she was smoothing air. "Harlow just gets too serious sometimes. Right, Har? Always the thoughtful one." They laughed, light and easy. I pretended the salt on my fries needed adjusting. No one asked about the woman I helped. No one noticed I stopped eating. After dinner, we drifted back to the courtyard. The bonfire cracked and hissed, lighting up faces like flickering portraits. Someone passed around canned wine. I passed. The sagebrush smelled stronger at night, like the earth was exhaling while no one watched. Taylor told a story about her ex, and Delia chimed in. "At least she didn't cry about it, unlike some people we know." Zoe added, "Yeah, some folks just drag the whole mood down, emotional drainers." I wasn't looking at them, but I didn't need to. I knew who they meant. I always knew. I stood up slowly, brushed off my jeans, and picked up my camera. No one asked where I was going. The overlook was just past the edge of the property, marked by a low wooden fence and a crooked bench. I walked past it, onto the flat rock ledge. The stars were just beginning to show, faint and scattered. Below, the desert floor stretched out, wide and silent. I raised my camera, but didn't take a picture. Instead, I let it hang at my side and whispered, "You don't have to keep shrinking to make them comfortable." The wind moved my hair off my face, almost gently. I stood there until the chill settled in my arms. When I got back to the room, the hallway light buzzed above me. I reached for my key card, slid it in. The red light blinked. I tried again. Nothing. I stepped back, checked the number. 4B, right door. Then I noticed the post-it. "Went to town early. See you tonight. R." No punctuation, No smiley face. Just that. But what made my chest tighten wasn't the note. It was the empty space where my bag had been. It was gone. I always believed if I was good, they'd come back for me. That morning, the silence answered otherwise. The wind had teeth that morning. I stepped out onto the porch of the hostel with only a light cardigan over my t-shirt, and it did nothing against the cold pressing in from the hills. The fog was lifting, thin veils unraveling across the sagebrush like a slow exhale. My arms wrapped around my middle as I stared down the dirt road, half hoping I'd see the SUV's headlights cutting through the haze. But there was nothing, not even tire tracks. I walked back to the door and tried my key again. Still nothing. My phone was at 4%. I tried Rowan's number first. Straight to voicemail, then Delia's. No ring, just the beep and a curt, "Can't talk right now" message. I pulled open Instagram on instinct, not logic. The group had posted a carousel, selfies with warm filters, laughing under string lights. One shot had been from last night, just before I'd walked off. I was in the original frame. I remembered the shutter clicking. But now I'm gone. Cropped, literally edited out. I closed the app and stood for a long minute in front of the hostel office door, uncertain if I was about to embarrass myself further. Then I knocked. A few moments later, the door creaked open. A man in his 50s with kind eyes and weathered hands peered out. His name tag said Luis. "You're with the Quinn group, right?" he asked, his voice gravelly but warm. "I was," I said, and immediately hated how small that sounded. His brow furrowed, and then something flickered in his expression. Recognition. "You're Harlow," he said, more certain now. "You're the one who helped my mother, back in Portland." It took me a second to catch up. Then I remembered. A case nearly 2 years ago. Maria Romero. She'd been living in a duplex with faulty plumbing, and her landlord tried to evict her after she filed a complaint. We'd won. Quietly. I never even met her son. I nodded, stunned. Luis stepped aside. "Come in. You look like you've been standing in more than just the cold." Inside was warmer, wood-paneled walls lined with hiking maps and a bulletin board full of community events. He poured tea into a thick ceramic mug and handed it to me without a word. It smelled like cinnamon and something earthy. He plugged my phone into a charger behind the desk. I sat, feeling the blood return to my fingertips. "You don't owe me anything," I said quietly. He didn't look up. "I know. That's not why I'm doing it." We sat in silence. Outside, a crow called once, then stopped. I glanced at my phone. 5%. Notifications began to roll in now that I had a signal. WhatsApp. The trip group chat was gone. Not silent. Gone. I hadn't left. I'd been removed. I stared at the screen. The little green icon now meant something else entirely. "I'll take you to the bus stop," Luis said finally. "Closest one is 20 minutes down the road." I should have said no. Should have insisted I'd figure it out. But something cracked open in me right then. Not from defeat, but from seeing clearly. He handed me the same kind of thank you card we'd mailed his mother back then. Small, hand-pressed paper. I turned it over in my hands. It was addressed to me. "Still matters," was scrawled on the back. Luis drove an old Jeep, the kind that rattled slightly when it idled. The road twisted gently through open land, sun climbing higher now, pulling golden lines across the hills. The fog had lifted. So did something in me. He let me out at a quiet bus stop with a slanted bench and a faded route map. I thanked him, and he just nodded once. No flourish, no false promises. As the bus pulled in, I checked my phone again. A new email had arrived, time-stamped just 15 minutes ago. Subject: Internal Review, Formal complaint filed from HR. Civil Voices legal filed by Rowan Quinn. My thumb froze over the screen. My breath caught, not in fear, but in something sharper, something I hadn't felt in a long time. So this was never just about forgetting me. It was about erasing me. Have you ever felt like I do now? The feeling of being an extra, invisible person in your own family. If you sympathize with me, please leave a comment number 9 in the comment section below. Now, let's get to the next development of this story. Turns out, when people think you're gone, they speak freely. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. Denver looked too bright when I arrived. The sun bounced off the station windows in wide, gold patches, and for a moment I had to squint just to see where I was going. The bus ride from Chimney Rock had left a tight ache in my lower back, and the duffel Luis lent me was cutting into my shoulder. I didn't have much in it, but the weight of starting over is never light. I checked into a budget motel on the edge of downtown. The kind with scratchy towels and vending machines that ate your quarters. Still, the lock clicked firmly behind me. That was more than I'd had in Chimney Rock. The first thing I did was plug in my phone. I told myself I'd rest, shower maybe, but instead, I opened my email. The subject line hit first. Notice of temporary review. HR. Civil Voices Legal. The message used cool, careful language. Concerns regarding erratic behavior during personal travel. Temporary suspension of case access pending internal evaluation. At the bottom, it read, Submitted by Rowan Quinn. I didn't move for a long time. I just stared at my name on the screen, sitting there like a question I was too tired to answer. I needed air, or coffee, or both. Union Station was only a few blocks away, and I wandered into the cafe inside, out of habit more than anything. It smelled like cinnamon and something nostalgic. Maybe clove, maybe the syrup they use for pumpkin lattes. I ordered one without thinking. The barista had gray at her temples and wore earrings shaped like tiny books. I sat near the window, fingers curled around the warm paper cup, trying to disappear. That's when I heard someone say my name. Harlow Quinn? I looked up. He was taller than I remembered, scruffy beard, worn flannel, but the eyes were the same. Benji? I blinked. Stokes? He laughed. Wow, I wasn't sure it was you. You haven't changed much. I had. But I let him say it. He pulled out the chair across from me without asking. Last time I saw you, you were reading Maya Angelou in the back of Mrs. Detmer's class and refusing to join student council. I smiled a little. Some things stick. He nodded toward my laptop. Saw your name in a nonprofit piece a year ago. Some housing rights thing. I remember thinking, yeah, that's Harlow, helping people who don't shout loud enough. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice just yet. He glanced at me again. You okay? I lied the way people do when they don't want to lie. I'm figuring some things out. He leaned back. Well, if you ever want help figuring out how to say something, loudly, clearly, I write for a few local blogs. People listen differently when you stop waiting to be introduced. It stayed with me, that line. When you stop waiting to be introduced. Later, back in the motel room, I opened Instagram again. Rowan's feed was still a collection of curated brightness. But someone had tagged her in a video, shared privately, then leaked. In it, Rowan laughed with Delia. I had to report her, Rowan was saying, tossing her hair. What if she shows up and cries in front of the board again? Delia snorted. HR's gonna love that. Rowan replied, At least she's finally quiet. Like, thank God. The screen went still. My hands did not. Benji helped me write it. Not the whole story, just the beginning. Family doesn't leave you in the mountains, then edit you out of the memory. I hit post before I could second guess it. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Within 20 minutes, people started responding. One woman commented, "You're not the only one she did this to." Another wrote, "Your words gave me courage." It was just the beginning, but then my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Take it down. Now you're humiliating this family." They didn't just leave me behind. They rewrote me, cropped me out like I was an accident in their scrapbook. The rain in Denver didn't fall hard. It just lingered, brushing the sidewalk like a memory that refused to fade. I stepped through the hotel's revolving door, water trailing behind me like punctuation. The lobby was all polished marble, glass, and artificial orchids that looked too stiff to ever be real. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, too bright, too sterile for what I was about to do. I'd received the screenshots 2 days ago. An anonymous message, no name, just, "You should see this." Attached were pieces of the truth I'd felt for months, but never held in my hands. Rowan's complaint to HR was riddled with fabrication, claims of instability, unprofessional behavior, emotional disruptions during our so-called family trip. There were messages, too. Text chains where she coached Delia and Zoe on what to say, how to make it sound concerned, but not personal. A friend of Luis's, a retired legal advocate, had helped me organize everything. Luis had even sent a statement of his own, calm, factual. Harlow Quinn was left at my property without belongings or communication. I intervened after witnessing distress. I didn't post any of that online, not yet. I wanted to look them in the eye. I spotted them near the back of the lounge area. Rowan in a sleek trench coat, crossing and uncrossing her legs. Mom, Jana, sat beside her, posture perfect, a hand wrapped loosely around a mug she hadn't touched. "Hi," I said as I approached. Rowan looked up with an expression she probably meant to be neutral. "You look tired?" "I am," I replied, "but awake." Mom gestured to the chair across from them. I didn't sit right away. I pulled a manila folder from my tote bag and placed it gently on the table. Rowan's eyes narrowed. "What is this?" "You know what it is," I said. "A timeline. Your complaint. The server logs. Statements." She gave a thin laugh. "Harlow, come on! You're blowing this way out of—" "No," I cut in, voice even. "I'm not blowing it up. You are. You filed a false report that put my job at risk. You manipulated our mother into silence. And you tried to erase me, but paper leaves ink. So do servers." Mom shifted in her seat. "Can't we just talk this through? No need to make it a spectacle." "A spectacle?" I repeated, my voice still low. I was left in the mountains with no phone, no ID. And when I made it back, I found out I'd been removed from the group, from the narrative, and from my own reputation. "This isn't a spectacle, Mom. It's a statement." Rowan leaned forward, voice clipped. "It was a misunderstanding. You've always been fragile. I didn't think you'd would fight back?" I tilted my head. "You didn't think I'd dare?" Silence spread between us like a spill no one wanted to clean up. I reached into the folder and slid the top page toward her. A printed copy of the HR report, annotated with timestamps, metadata, supporting screenshots. "You don't get to erase me and still control the version of me that survives." Rowan's hand trembled as she touched the paper. Her face lost its structure, the calm unraveling. Mom's voice came soft. So you're really going to do this? I met her eyes. Number I already did. I didn't come back to beg for space at their table. I came back to build my own. Portland smelled like rain and roasted chestnuts. The maples on Hawthorne Street had turned a brilliant rust, and the air was just cold enough to press you into your coat, but not enough to keep you inside. I walked with a coffee in one hand and a tote bag slung over the other shoulder, its weight reassuring rather than burdensome. My steps didn't rush anymore. Luis had said once, "Some storms clear the sky." This one did. It stripped everything down to what mattered, and I'd stopped apologizing for still being here. The small cafe tucked between the bakery and the vintage record store had a hand-painted sign, "Tonight, Community Voices Live." Inside, folding chairs had been arranged in a loose half-moon around a makeshift stage. The tables were pushed to the side, but the scent of cinnamon rolls still lingered, sweet and familiar. I helped hang the last of the volunteer photos near the entryway, careful to center them just right. One of the pictures showed a woman holding her eviction appeal letter. Another showed kids stacking books at a local drive. I didn't need my name on any of them. I knew what I'd done. That was enough. The podcast interview aired last week. Just 15 minutes of me talking about what it means to be left behind and what it takes to come back anyway. I hadn't planned for it to take off, but people listened. Then they shared it. Then they wrote. One email simply said, "Your story helped me leave a toxic family dynamic." Thank you. Another, "I thought I was the only one." I saved each message in a folder marked real, not feedback, not praise, just real. Luis and I talked on video the day after the interview went live. He sat on the porch of the hostel, a mug in hand, wind tousling his graying hair. I told him about the podcast, about the job offer I'd accepted coordinating storytelling programs for local justice projects. He grinned and said, "Told you." Mountains show you who still follows. I sent him a framed photo after that, a shot of Chimney Rock taken in the last light of evening. On the back, I wrote, "Thanks for not looking away." Tonight's event wasn't for me, but someone must have said something. Midway through the evening, the host paused to thank a community advocate who's helped more quietly than most. My name wasn't announced, but when I stood, I felt the hands that clapped weren't doing it out of obligation. They meant it. After the lights dimmed, a girl, maybe 17, approached me. Her sweater sleeves were pulled over her knuckles, eyes flicking toward mine, then down again. She handed me a folded card and whispered, "Because of you, I stayed." I didn't open it right away. Some things are meant to be held before they're read. Benji found me as I stepped outside into the cooling night. The sidewalk glowed beneath the lamplight, and the bookstore window beside us reflected us both. Older, a little dented, still standing. He tilted his head. "Would you ever write about what happened?" I smiled. "I already am." We said goodnight and parted at the corner. I didn't look back. As I passed the bookstore, I caught my reflection again in the dark glass. Hair tucked behind one ear, posture relaxed, eyes steady, no more waiting to be let in. I made it back. Not to them. To me. Some endings don't arrive with fireworks. They come gently, like leaves turning in October, reminding us that change is not loud, just lasting. After everything, I didn't need to be invited back into their lives. I just needed to stop asking. Kindness, offered without conditions, has a way of circling back when the world seems to forget you. And judgment? It often hides where love should live, until someone dares to name the difference. If this story found its way to your heart, take a moment to look up. Someone nearby might just need to be seen without having to ask. A quiet act of grace might be what gets them through.